Calimala, how to set up and play. First thing you'll do is lay out the game board. You're going to shuffle and randomly place the 15 scoring tiles. You'll also shuffle and randomly place the 8 action tiles. Next, randomly select a start player. Play will proceed clockwise from the start player. Give them the active player token and also mark which player is the original start player, because all players will get equal number of turns in the game. All players get a token on 0 on the VP track and a 50 VP token next to the score track. Each player will also get a player board, 40 cubes, 3 trade houses, 3 ships, and 2 unbuilt workshops. Next, you're going to shuffle the deck of scoring cards. There are 10 scoring cards. You're going to distribute these evenly to each player. So since I'm setting this up for a 3-player game, each player are going to get 3 scoring cards. If there are any remaining scoring cards, you're going to place 1 face up and the rest can get returned to the game box. For example, if this was a 5-player game, you would distribute them evenly. Each player would have 2. You'd have no face up and no return to the game box. From their dealt cards, each player is going to look at them and select 1 to keep, and the ones they don't keep are going to get discarded and returned to the game box. Next, you're going to set aside these 5 specific action cards: wood, brick, marble, weave, and build. And then in reverse turn order, each player is going to select 1 of these and take that into their hand. Once all players have selected their starting action card, the remaining cards can get shuffled to form the draw deck. The final part of setup is giving each player their discs. This is based on the player count. So if this was a 5-player game, each player would have 8 in their color and 2 white discs. In a 4-player game, they get 10 in their color and 2 white discs. And in this 3-player game, they'll get 12 in their color and 3 white discs. On the active player's turn, they can place 1 of their discs on any of these spots on the game board. To place a disc, it's legal as long as they can take at least 1 of the 2 adjacent actions next to the spot. Once they place their disc, they can take both adjacent actions in any order they would like. Whenever a player is unable to take an action at all, they can draw 1 card from the action card deck. Whenever a player decides to place their white disc instead of their own color disc, they actually get to take both actions twice. So that's 4 actions, and they can take those in any order they like. They can take this action, then this action, then this action, or they could take 2 actions, then 2 actions. And they simply would place their disc on top if this was a subsequent player's turn. The same rules apply with the white disc. Any of the actions that you're unable to take at all, for each of those you get to draw 1 card from the action deck. Also, a player may decide to voluntarily not perform an action, but in that case they can't take a card then. Also, players are allowed to play action cards from their hand either before or after each of their main actions, and that can include any action cards just drawn during that action sequence. So in this example, let's say the yellow player went first. They placed there. They took both of those actions. Then the active player token moves clockwise around the table to the next active player. And let's say, following this example, they decide to place 1 of their white discs. So they get 4 total actions in any order they like. Once the active player is done taking actions, playing action cards, then we activate discs underneath the token that was just placed. We're going to activate up to 2 discs underneath the one that was just placed, and then those players, in disc order from top to bottom, get to take actions as if they had just placed their disc there. So in this example, the yellow player would get to take both of these actions, and just like before, any action they're not able to perform at all, they get to draw a card. Since they weren't the active player, if they're not able to perform either of these 2 actions, they get to draw 2 cards from the draw deck. And just like when you're playing your normal disc, they can play any of their action cards before or after the main actions. So let's continue this example. Let's say the next player in clockwise order, the active player. Remember, they're allowed to place in any of these spots. Let's say they also decide to place here. So they get to take these two actions, play their cards, and then it goes to the next disc. Remember, we can activate up to 2 discs below the top one. The white one now is neutral, so no player gets to activate that one, but then the yellow player would get to take their 2 actions. Continuing on, whenever a 4th disc is placed on a stack, the bottom one is actually going to get kicked out of the stack, and that's going to signify a scoring event. So you would take that bottom disc that got kicked out and place it over here to remind us that we're going to actually score the next tile in order after we've resolved the 3 discs above. So the player placing the disc would go, then we'd go to the purple player, and then the white's neutral, so nothing would happen. So after we resolve all these discs, we now go back here. This disc that got kicked out didn't activate any actions, but it's now going to count as a seat in the city council for that player, and you're going to put it on the next scoring tile in order, moving left to right, top to bottom, and we're now going to score this tile. Once we're finished scoring that tile, we simply keep going clockwise to the next active player. If a 4th disc ever gets placed and a white disc gets kicked out, instead of placing this white disc on the city council, the player that forced the white disc to get kicked out gets to replace this with one of theirs. So they would take one of their tokens from the supply, they get to take the white token into their supply, and then this disc would just get placed here to remind us that we're now going to trigger the next scoring tile. If the player that forced a white disc to get kicked out, let's say they're all out of tokens, they would simply take one of their markers from any other action spot and move that to City Council. And then they would take the white marker that got kicked out and just place it on top of the action spot where they pulled their own marker. Alright, so let's cover the 9 different actions now. The wood, brick, and marble action work the same way, and on each player's player board, there's an aid that reminds them of how they work. So when you take the wood action, you get to take 1 cube from your supply and add it to your wood storage. In the same way, if you were taking the brick action, you take a cube and add it to your brick storage. And likewise, the marble action, a cube, and add it to your marble storage. If at any time your storage is full and you were unable to take that action, that would allow you to draw an action card. Let's cover the artwork action next. The artwork action allows players to turn in 1 marble cube to create an artwork in one of the 4 buildings. So they would simply take a marble from their player board and add it. You can see the artwork icon at the bottom of the 4 buildings, and they can add it to any one of those in an empty spot. When taking the artwork action, if all of the artwork spots were full, or if they had no marble on their player board to donate, they could draw an action card. Let's cover the contribute action next. This allows the player to donate 1 cube, either wood, brick, or marble, to one of the 3 buildings under construction. And the cube would come from their player board to the row associated with the building that they're donating or contributing to. So simply take off their board. If they choose using the contribute action to take wood, they can put it on the wood row in any empty spot. And if there were no empty spots left, or they had no cubes on their player board to contribute, they would draw an action card. Next is the build action. This allows players to build ships, trade houses, or workshops. With the build action, you can only build one of these. So it takes 2 wood to build a ship, 2 bricks to build a trade house, and a wood and a brick to build a workshop. Those simply come off of your player board. So to build a ship, you would turn in the 2 wood, take 1 from your supply, and it comes here into your canal. Building a trade house works a little different. We can see it costs 2 brick, so those would come off your player board. But the trade house would be built in one of the 3 trade cities. on the board, Troyes, Bruges, or Hamburg. And so you would put it in one of these empty trade house spots. A player can ever only have a maximum of one of their trade houses in each of these cities. Finally, instead of building a ship or a trade house, you can decide to build a workshop. It costs 1 wood and 1 brick from your player board, and you take one of your unbuilt workshops and place it into one of the empty spots. When taking the build action, you would only draw an action card if you had no resources to build one of the 3 items, or if you had already built the maximum 3 ships, 3 workshops, or 3 trade houses, or if there were no empty spots for your trade house. Next is the weave action. This allows the player to produce cloth in their workshops. So the player would place 1 cube in each empty spot in each workshop. So with 1 weave action, since this player has 2 workshops, they would get a cube in each. And you would only draw an action card if all your workshops were full and you weren't able to take the action at all. The transport action allows the player to transport 1 cloth cube to each trade house they have on the board. So if we look at this player, they have 2 trade houses on the board, so they can transport 1 cloth cube here and 1 cloth cube here on any empty spot. And that can come from any of their workshop spots, and so they can place those there. Now a player is allowed to not deliver up to the maximum. So with taking the transport action, if they only want to deliver 1 cube to this trade house and forgo delivering that one, that's allowed. And if you weren't able to transport a single cube, either because you had no cloth cubes or all the spots were full, or you had no trade houses built on the board yet, then you could draw an action card. Finally, the ship action allows the player to ship 1 cloth cube per ship they have to any of the 3 port cities on the game board. The cubes can be delivered to the same city or different cities. It's 1 cloth cube per ship. So if we look at this player, they've got 2 ships, so that allows them to deliver 2 cloth cubes, and they can decide to place them both in the same city or spread them out to different port cities. And just like with the trade houses, you don't have to ship up to your maximum level. And with the ship action, you would draw an action card if you had no cloth cubes to ship, you had no ships, or there were no empty spots in the port cities. The game end will be triggered in one of 2 ways. If all players have played all of their discs, you simply finish the active player's turn, and then you're going to score all the remaining tiles that haven't been scored yet. The other way the game can end is if the final scoring tile gets scored. If that happens, you finish the current round, so all players get an equal number of turns. Any kicked out discs after that one gets scored just simply get removed from the game, and then you would go to final scoring. So now let's cover how the scoring tiles work and then the end game scoring cards. So as you've seen in every game, every scoring tile will get scored. Based on the category, points are going to be awarded to the players that have the most, the second most, and the third most cubes in that category. The most will get 3 points, the second 2 points, and the third most will get 1 point. So when we get to the wood scoring tile, for example, we would simply count up all the cubes that were donated in the wood row in all 3 of these buildings, and then award the highest, second highest, and third highest. Likewise, for the brick and marble scoring, you would look in their corresponding row across all 3 buildings and add those cubes. There are 3 tiles that score the 3 buildings under construction. So when one comes up, you just simply look at that building and you're going to total all the cubes from wood donation, brick donation, marble donation, and artwork. For the port scoring tile, you would simply total all the cubes in all 3 of the port cities. Likewise, for the trade city tile, you would total and sum all the cubes across all 3 of the trade cities. For the artwork scoring tile, you're going to look across this bottom row for all the artwork cubes donated. That's for the 3 buildings under construction as well as the city council building. And then finally, there are the 6 city scoring tiles. You've got the 3 port cities and the 3 trade cities. You simply go to the actual city being scored and just sum all the cubes in that city spot. One thing to keep in mind, you always have to have at least 1 cube to be eligible for any of the scoring tiers. So you couldn't score the 3rd place tier if you had no cubes. Also, if there's ever a tie, we look here to break ties. So let's say there was a tie between the yellow player and the red player for the most number of cubes in Hamburg. Then we would come here and we see which player has more seats and artwork contributed. So here we can see yellow has 2 seats and 1 artwork, so that's 3. But red also has 2 seats and 1 artwork, so that's also 3. So if that's still a tie, you go strictly to see who has more seats. Yellow has 2 seats and red has 2 seats. So if that's tied, you see who achieved that total first. So we can see red achieved 2 seats before yellow achieved their 2 seats. And if neither player had seats, you would see who contributed the first artwork. And then if there's still a tie, simply split the points rounding down. For final card scoring, each player will now reveal their hidden scoring card. If there was a face-up one, you would simply add it there. All players reveal, and now we're going to score all of these categories. The only difference is the victory points are higher. For the highest number of cubes, it's 5 points, second highest 3 points, and third highest 1 point. All the tie breaks work the same way as the scoring tiles. After scoring the endgame scoring cards, most victory points wins the game. And that should be everything you need to set up and play Calimala.